I know I haven't talked about it much on the channel, but I was raised in a pretty religious household. Both my parents were pretty much, or are pretty much, lifelong Christians, and I certainly was born and raised in the church. I grew up in a Southern Baptist community my entire life, went to the same church. We never moved. I lived in the same house until I was 24, I think, when I got my own house, which I moved just right down the street from my parents. Anyway, I would say it was not quite fundamentalist. I mean, we were fundamentalist, but it's hard to explain because it's not as sensational as you might think it is based on churches like the Westboro Baptist Church, the famous uh, group that would like protest the funerals of fallen soldiers or certain events with extremely crude signs that, are comical in a way if they weren't so sincere. Um, Nowhere near that. But I do remember actually going to I wouldn't really say a protest, but a demonstration against abortion where, or really a rally. We just held up signs outside the church facing one of the roads that ran adjacent to it with, much more anodyne pro-life messages than you might expect if your idea of what Baptists are like only comes from the Westboro Baptist Church. The story I want to tell is the one where basically I got my youth pastor fired. And also, I want to say I'm no longer a Christian. I haven't attended church regularly since I was like 16 when I learned how to drive and I started skipping church and only going to Sunday school because you can't really skip Sunday school without being noticed that you're not there. Um, so, just as a disclaimer. Um, Basically, I really liked my youth pastor, and to an extent, he liked me. Um, I was one of his, I guess, closest pupils or closest students. Um, we did skits together. Um, I thought we had a connection. Skits are a big thing in Baptist churches, I think, and so being involved in skits, it's like not everyone does that. And of course, it's actually kind of against my nature because I'm very shy normally, and I really don't want to draw attention to myself. But I feel like we shared a sense of humor, and he kind of understood me, and so I felt comfortable doing that with him. And there were other kids involved that were my friends, so it was fun. Um, but he had a fatal flaw, I think, and that was he took his job a little too seriously. And by that, I mean, I think he felt like he was something much more than just the lowest ranking pastor at a church that basically just was free daycare for, you know, middle schoolers and high schoolers at a Baptist church. he was, like any good pastor, a very religious guy who felt that he was training like the next generation of Christian proselytizers, like the next apostles. And another aspect of Southern Baptism and being a youth pastor is organizing retreats and events for your students to go to. And normally, there's a summer one where you travel some distance, and there's one where usually it's local, and you might spend a couple nights at another member's house, like maybe everyone's parents host 5 or 6 kids in their house, and the kids staying there, none of them are their own kids, right? So everyone's staying in a different place, and basically at all these events, you're just having church in a different place. That's all you're doing. You're having church more frequently and at a different place than you normally would. And that's the extent of it. And normally it's very emotional and whatever. And normally they're open to everyone. If you want to go, you can sign up. But this pastor, he had this idea where like he was going to separate the student body or the youth group membership into 2 tiers, like an elite leadership tier and like the hoi polloi tier. And I don't know why he just had that in his head, that idea in his head to hold secret meetings with a significant amount of students, like maybe 20 at the max students in this special group. And that might have been half of the regular attendees. So that was one aspect where he was having like secret elite meetings. And I still don't know what the content of those meetings were. I'm sure it was totally banal and not interesting. But just being included in that special group was probably enough for everyone attending. Because, kids like to feel special. And they like to be included, especially by adults who they respect. And I think most people liked this youth pastor, especially the kids. So that's one aspect. And that kind of was in the background for me. I knew of its existence, but it didn't bother me so much that it was going on and that I wasn't involved. So eventually, I became aware that a lot of the youth group is going to this this retreat, where you go somewhere, you stay at a hotel, you have a lot of church, you come back. And this one was focused on leadership. And this might, now that I'm going through the story, this might be why he created the secret group in the first place. Because I think this particular retreat was focused on like kids that maybe were picked out by their ministers as having leadership potential. And I think maybe one of the activities there was to like take a personality exam, like the Myers-Briggs or Meyer-Briggs, however you say that, a personality exam, the 4-letter one. And of course there was live music. If you're not familiar, basically Southern Baptist worship is just like a rock concert. That's what it looks like to an outsider, but to me it just seems normal. So yeah, now that I'm saying this story and recounting it in detail, I think probably the knowledge of the purpose of this retreat was the motivation for creating the secret group in the first place. And to kind of skip over a lot of things, basically I just come to church one Sunday and I go in there and he's not there, the minister, the pastor. Almost all my friends are not there. I'm there with basically no one that I hung out with. I recognized some of the people there, but I wasn't really buddies with them. So it was kind of a sad scene where it's like, oh, all my friends are somewhere else today having fun on like an elite's getaway, and all of us losers are here back at the home church kind of holding the bag, like holding our hat between our hands. And I remember the head pastor, I don't think he was aware of this. He came in and said some stuff to us, apologizing basically, and kind of, I think, trying to understand what was happening exactly and why it was happening. And then I remember maybe that night texting my youth pastor, or maybe he texted me and then I just replied. I remember this exactly. I said, "Your name is Mud," is what I said to him. And I don't remember any other exchanges. I wish I still had those messages, but this was like, probably half a dozen phones ago that this happened. Yeah, and then eventually, he stayed for maybe a month or two, I feel like. Shortly after he was fired or he was asked to resign. And that's a story of how I really didn't get him fired, but my family was pretty involved in the church. My mom was the treasurer. My dad technically could not be a deacon because he had a prior marriage that ended in divorce, and that excluded him, but he was a very well-liked member of the congregation, very well-respected member of the choir. And I was a good kid in the youth group, but I was excluded. So I guess my advice is, if you're a youth pastor, to not exclude anyone. And if you do it in a very open way where it seems fair, where it seems like, just lie and say like, oh, you can sign up, but like just say we ran out of spots for the kids that you don't want to go. Something like that. But anyway, yeah, that guy, he's still a pastor, but he never got a job as good as the one I think he had. And not probably because he couldn't get one, but because he like became obsessed with being a church planter. So like since then he's made like 4 or 5 churches, which are all the same, where he's just the head pastor with like 1 or 2 other guys that maybe he rotates with. But like they all have like funny names that are, if you're from around the Southeast, you've probably known a guy like this, where like all the names are like at least 3 syllables, and like it's a obscure English word that has some sort of, well, probably it's a Greek word or a Latin word that's like evocative of renewal and rebirth. I won't say any of them. Oh, one of them was the Vineyard. Okay, so like it's stuff like that. It's like really twee kind of funny branding, but that's really popular. and like this, almost like the smaller the church, the better. Like a small church seems like kind of really elite and like secretive. Like it's like an early Christian church. Like you're in the Roman Empire and you're like meeting in secret in someone's house to have church. Like that's cool. But then like you like to like a mid-size where like you're in a huge like garage or something, or you're in a school on like a Sunday in this huge building and like 12 people are there. And it seems kind of lame. Then you gotta like, it's like lame for a long time until you have your own building. And I don't think he'll ever have his own church built or whatever, or be the leader of a standard church again. And that's fine. He's doing well for himself. And I really, you know, another aspect of this that I want to talk about is like, does this bother me still? And I think I have to admit that at the time, obviously it did bother me, being excluded and being separated and kind of, you know, seen as less than compared to all of my friends who went. Like I was like the only one of my friend group in the church that didn't go. So that was obviously very devastating for me. And I don't think I really blamed my friends, because I think I understood that it wasn't really their fault, and you can kind of understand how they might not be emotionally mature enough to realize what was going on. Maybe they didn't know what was going on. Maybe they didn't know that I wasn't invited. Oh, I'm sure they did. And one aspect of this that I forgot to mention is like one of the excuses or one of the reasons why they said I was excluded was because they prayed about it. It's like the pastor and his two assistants who were just like really old, like from my perspective then really old, but like they were just like freshmen in college. Like they prayed about every one of the students, asking God to tell them which ones deserved to go and which ones didn't need to go. And I guess I didn't need to go. So says God. And looking back, it's kind of funny, but also really kind of scary how, I don't know, authority and the way you think the world works, the way you think the world is, can really influence your decisions and how you go about things. So yeah, does it bother me today? I think a little bit, yeah. You know, I don't think there's any shame in that I have kind of a bit of trauma around this. I don't think it bothers me that much. And I certainly don't think about it very often. I just am telling this story because I was reminded of it in talking to a friend today. And I was like, oh yeah, that happened. So, you know, it's just one of those things that'll stick with me. Kind of like my other story that I told, where basically I caused someone's death. I'm not going to forget about that. Obviously, it'll stick with me till the day I die. And I think this will too, but it's just something that I think definitely shaped my personality in some way. Now, okay, that's one question. The other question, and if you're a Christian, you might be tempted to think this: did this cause me to become atheist, to leave the church, to stop going? I don't think so. I think my commitment to leaving the church has really made my life worse in some ways. You know, I've separated myself from my parents religiously, and that is not good. You know, it's something we really don't talk about. I've talked about it once with my dad, and Have not really talked about it with my mom, though I'm sure my dad filled her in on what I told my father. He kind of cornered me in a road trip one time, asking me about these things, and I was really delicate. I didn't really lay it on thick. I just said I lost my faith. And I think anything more than that would have maybe given him a heart attack. Because they really do believe in this stuff, and, I'm not sure the exact details. He's probably thinking or believing in the most charitable thing where if you're once saved, you're always saved. So I'm not sure he's scared I'm going to hell when I die, but I'm sure it weighs on him, no doubt. And so that's a very stressful thing. And my life would be easier if I became a Christian or pretended like I was a Christian. Certainly socially it would be easier. Family life would be easier. Just fitting in where I live would be easier. But I'm not a Christian, not because I can't fit in or I'm a misfit or that I was excluded as a kid by one youth minister. It's just I don't believe in it. I don't think it's real. I just think it's a historical accident that Christianity won out, not because Jesus actually rose from the dead. So, yeah. Next time in this series, I'll tell you about the youth minister that came after him who ended up shooting himself in the chest in front of his wife and his adopted Chinese daughter. Stay tuned.